Since 2007, human feet in running shoes have washed ashore along the Salish Sea. Public assumed the worst. The forensic truth is stranger and sadder. More than 20 of them over the years, 1 or 2 a season, along the coastlines of British Columbia and Washington states. A running shoe on the sand, a sock inside it, and a foot inside the sock. For years the story was a killer. Someone cutting off feet and dropping them into the sea. There was no killer. The coroners ruled that out. The question the case actually leaves behind is the one no one clicks for. How many of these feet still have no name? And how many people walk into these waters and are never recovered at all? This is the riot hill detached. This is the story of the Salish Sea feet, not as a horror story, because it is not one, as what it actually is. The Salish Sea is the semi-enclosed inland sea between Vancouver Island, the British Columbia mainland, and the Washington coast. It holds 3 great arms of water: the Strait of Georgia in the north, the Strait of Juan de Fuca along the international boundary. It is ringed by land on almost every side. That shape matters. It is the reason the sea beaches what it beaches. The feet began coming ashore in the summer of 2007. They have not entirely stopped. To understand why, you have to start on a small island in the Strait of Georgia on a summer afternoon with a 12-year-old girl and a shoe. Chapter 1. The first foot. On the 20th of August 2007, a family from Washington state was picnicking on a beach on Jedediah Island. Jedediah Island is a small provincial park in the Strait of Georgia between Vancouver Island and the British Columbia mainland. A 12-year-old girl found a blue and white running shoe on the sand, a men's size 12. She picked it up. Inside was a sock. Inside the sock was a human foot, dried and skeletonized by exposure. Her mother called the authorities. They took the shoe and its contents away for examination. The shoe was later identified as an Adidas, made in 2003, distributed mainly in India. The foot was that of an adult man. It would take years and DNA, but that foot would eventually be traced to a missing man who had struggled with depression. 6 days later, on the 26th of August, a couple out hiking on Gabriola Island found a second running shoe on the shore. Gabriola Island is another strait of Georgia Island, a short distance south of Jedediah. It was a black and white Reebok, also a men's size 12 model made in 2004 and since discontinued. Inside was a second decomposing foot. The 2 feet did not belong to the same person, different brands of shoe, and decisively both were right feet. 2 feet, 2 running shoes, 2 islands, and 6 days apart. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police did not hide their unease. Finding 1 foot, an officer said, was 1,000,000 to 1. To find crazy, his best guess, he told a reporter, was that they came from missing persons. Another officer called the timing suspicious. That was the Honest Institutional read in August of 2007. It was also the seed of the myth. Reporters came to the coast. The story went national, then international within days. It had the structural feel of the opening scene of a horror film. That is the framing that took hold, and it held for years. But it was not the opening of a horror film. It was the first visible surfacing of a natural process that had most certainly been happening quietly for a very long time. Chapter 2, the chronology. The discoveries did not stop between 2007 and 2023. The beaches of the Salish Sea produced a steady run of detached feet, 1 or 2 a year on average, spread across the entire basin. The pattern in the list is the whole point, so it is worth setting the list down in order. The first two in August of 2007 on Jedediah and Gabriola, both right feet, one later identified, one belonging to a different person. In February of 2008, right foot in a Nike came ashore on Valdez Island. It was matched by DNA to a 21-year-old man from Surrey who had been missing for 4 years, and paired with a left foot found on that June. In May of 2008, right foot in a New Balance was recovered on Kirkland Island in the Fraser River Delta. That November, its pair, a left foot, was found near Richmond. Together they were identified as a woman. In August of 2008, a right foot washed ashore on the Strait of Juan de Fuca. On the Washington side, the first foot recovered on the American shore. It would stay unidentified for nearly 17 years. Hold that one, we come back to it at the end. In October of 2009, a right foot in a Nike was found in Richmond, later identified as a Vancouver area man missing since early 2008. In 2010, a right foot came ashore on Whidbey Island in Puget Sound. No shoe, no sock. It produced no database match. It remains. The same year, a right foot in a small hiking boot was found at Tacoma. It too remains unidentified. 2011 brought 3. A foot at False Creek in Vancouver, a foot at Sasamat Lake, and a leg bone foot at Lake Union in Seattle. The Sasamat Lake foot was identified as Stefan Zahorisko, a shaman who had been missing since 1987, 24 years. The Lake Union foot remains unidentified. In 2014, a New Balance shoe with of came ashore in Seattle. It remains unidentified. In February of 2016, 2 feet were recovered 5 days apart at Botanical Beach on Vancouver Island. Testing confirmed them a matched pair. Both remain unidentified. In December of 2017, a foot came ashore at Jordan River and was identified as Stanley Okumoto, 79, of Silverdale, Washington. In September of 2018, a left foot in a light gray Nike came ashore in West Vancouver, linked by DNA to a man who had gone missing earlier that same year. On the first day of 2019, boot with a foot was found at Everett, Washington, and identified as Antonio Neal, missing since December of in 2021, a right foot in a work boot was recovered at Bellingham, Washington. It remains unidentified. That December, a New Balance shoe with a foot was found near Port Angeles and identified as Geraldine Smith, missing since 2018 from Sequoia. And on the 23rd of July 2023, a foot came ashore at Gonzales Beach in Victoria. The most recent confirmed human. There have been no confirmed human discoveries since a later find in December of 2025 turned out to be rare. Three features of that list carry the whole argument. They are worth naming, namely. First, the geography is the entire basin: North Strait, Boundary Strait, Southern Sound, River Delta, not a single dumping ground. Not what one offender. Second, the shoes are almost all modern, buoyant, athletic footwear. The lightweight foam sole, the shoe that floats. The feet without shoes are the third and most important. The identification column is not full. Some feet have names, many do not. The line between those two columns is this whole story. Chapter 3, the Hoax Feet violin. The panic of the early years produces its own artifacts. In June of 2008, in the middle of the first wave, a shoe and sock were found near Campbell River on Vancouver Island. They were stuffed with dried seaweed packed to look like a foot. Examination found it was not human at all. It was a skeletonized animal paw packed into the sock, the rest filled out. The Mounties treated it as a hoaxdatum. The coverage records to such false alarms over the years, the seaweed and animal paw, and at least one case of animal remains taken for a human foot before examination corrected the record. The hoaxes are small, but they belong in the account because they measure the temperature of the moment. By the summer of 2008, the story of someone cutting off feet was strong enough that a person went to the trouble of building a fake one. The hoax feet are evidence of the myth. They are not evidence of a crime. Chapter 4, what the water actually does. Why specifically feet and not hands or heads or whole bodies? This is settled forensic science. The first part is the joint. The human ankle is not a strong articulation. It is bound by soft ligaments and surrounded by soft tissue, not fused by a heavy structure, and it sits at the far end of the limb where the tissue is thin. Gail Anderson is a forensic scientist at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia. She became one of the principal voices explaining the phenomenon. In the water, she said, crabs and other creatures start with the ankles first, because the skin and bone there are not as tough. Marine scavengers, crabs, shrimp, the small bottom feeders of cold coastal water. They consume soft tissue and leave bone. They work the thin exposed tissue of the ankle before they work the denser mass of the body. As the ligaments go, the foot separates Anderson noted the crucial qualification: extremities like feet and hands commonly detach as a body decomposes in water, but they rarely float, which brings in the second part, the shoe. A modern athletic sneaker is built on a thick sole of buoyant, closed-cell foam. The same material that makes the shoe comfortable also makes it float, and it makes the shoe largely indigestible through marine life. When the ankle joint separates underwater, the foot is often still inside the shoe. The shoe traps air. It provides its own flotation, and it shelters the foot from the full decomposition around it. So the foot in its buoyant shoe rises. The rest of the body, denser and unprotected, sinks or disperses along the bottom. This is why it is specifically a phenomenon of shod feet, and it is why it became visible in the 2000s and not earlier. Older footwear, leather soles, and heavy boots tended to sink. The mass adoption of the foam-soled running shoe changed with the water returns. Human remains have washed ashore along this coast for well over a century. The buoyant shoe is simply what now carries the foot the last distance and holds it together long enough to be found. The third part is the absence of the thing everyone feared. In not one case worked by the British Columbia Coroners Service, across the entire run of discoveries were cut marks or tool marks found on a foot severed by a blade or a saw leaves characteristic marks in the bone. Disarticulation by decomposition, and scavenging does not. The bones told a consistent story. It was not the story of a knife. The feet came apart the way a body comes apart in cold salt water, slowly, and without a hand on them. Chapter 5. Why the Salish Sea? Why this sea, and why does it beach what it beaches? The answer is the shape of the basin and the behavior of what floats in it. And here the relevant expert is not a forensic scientist. He is an oceanographer. The Salish Sea is not open ocean. It is a large, semi-enclosed inland sea. The Strait of Georgia in the north, the Strait of Juan de Fuca opening west to the Pacific, Puget Sound reaching south into Washington. It is fed by rivers. The largest, the Fraser, empties into it near Vancouver. A basin of that shape traps floating objects. It does not flush them out to sea. The currents circulate inside it, and the prevailing winds push surface debris toward the shore rather than out through the. Parker McCready is a physical oceanographer at the University of Washington. He put the governing dynamic in one sentence. In the Salish Sea, he said, west to east winds almost always blow objects to shore. A buoyant object that enters the water in the basin is far more likely to be carried onto a beach than the foot in its floating shoe is just a small drifting object. It obeys the same rules as any other piece of flotsam in a semi-enclosed sea onshore. The scientist who made the discipline of exactly that is Curtis Ebismeyer, a retired Seattle oceanographer. He spent his career tracking ocean currents by following the debris they carry. He became known for reconstructing currents from mass spills of consumer goods, but most famously in 1990, tens of thousands of Nike sneakers went overboard from a container ship in the North Pacific. He tracked them as they made landfall along the Oregon and Washington coasts, building a network of beachcombers who reported where each shoe came ashore. Working with a drift model, he could predict where floating objects released at a given point would be. When feet in running shoes began coming ashore in the Salish Sea, Ebismeyer was the natural authority. He and other oceanographers were among the first to say publicly that the discoveries did not require a sinister explanation. A buoyant shoe with a foot in it was, to a flotsam scientist, an entirely predictable drifter in a basin that catches drifters. The same buoyant sneaker physics that let the Ebismeyer map ocean currents from spilled footwear is the physics that carries a disarticulated foot through a Salish Sea beach. There is nothing supernatural in it. There is nothing criminal in it. It is a semi-enclosed sea, an onshore wind, and a shoe that floats. Chapter 6. The people oriented the being. Where a foot has been matched to a name, it has been matched to a person. The discipline of this case is to keep the person and not the specimen at the front of the sentence. These are, without exception, among the identified non-criminal deaths, people who drowned, people who branched into the water on their own, people who were lost and not found until a foot came ashore years later. The most fully documented is the Patullo Bridge case. In April of 24, a woman died by suicide from the Patullo Bridge, which crosses the Fraser River at New Westminster. Her name has been withheld at her family's request. It is right to leave it withheld, so we will. 4 years later, her feet came back. Her right foot in a New Balance was found on Kirkland Island in May of 2008. Her left foot, also a New Balance, was found near Richmond that November. The Coroners Service matched the 2 feet to each other and to her through post-mortem investigation and DNA. The feet had detached naturally over the 4 years between her death and their recovery. Her death was a suicide. There was no crime in it. And there was the other identifications. Each carried their own story. In July of 2008, one of the early feet was matched to a man who had struggled with depression and had, in the coroner's assessment, most likely taken his own life. His identity was withheld at his family's request. It stays withheld. The Valdez and West Ham Island feet were a pair belonging to a 21-year-old man from Surrey. The Sasamat Lake foot belonged to Stefan Zahorushko, a fisherman missing since 1987, 24 years before his foot came ashore. The Jordan River foot was Stanley Okumoto, 79, of Silverdale, Washington. The Everett foot was Antonio Neo, missing since 2016. The Port Angeles foot was Geraldine Smith, missing since 2018 from Sequim, Washington. Each name is a person, the water partly returned, a death confirmed, an ambiguous absence turned at last into a definite grief. For every one of these families, the foot was not a hard, it was in a hard and narrow way an answer. But not every foot has a name, and that is where the case stops being about the water and starts being about a system. Chapter 7 on the record.com. The institutional closing of the serial killer story came in December. Another foot had been found on a British Columbia beach. In response, the British Columbia Coroners Service issued a formal statement. Foul play, it said, had been ruled out by the authorities in every previous case worked to that point. In none of them had the evidence indicated a crime. By that date, the coroners had identified 8 of the 12 feet, then recovered in British Columbia, tracing them to 6 individuals, 4 single feet and 2 matched pairs. Every one of them had either taken their own life or died by accident. None of the feet showed trauma, none showed cut marks. The service attributed the entire phenomenon to natural processes. Decomposition, separating the foot at the weak ankle, buoyant footwear floating it to shore, marine scavenging, doing work that panicked observers had blamed on a blade. It is worth being precise about what the coroner service did and did not say. It did not say the cases were closed or the dead all named. Several were unidentified even then. It said on the authority of the province's own death investigation agency that there was no crime. That distinction matters because 2 questions had been fused in the public mind for decades. Is someone doing this? And who are these people? The coroners answered the first question. No one is doing this. The water is doing this. And in answering it, they left the second question standing alone. Once foul play is off the table, the only remaining mystery is identity. And that is the mystery a statement cannot close. Because it is not a question of what happened to the feet, it is a question of who is missing. Chapter 8, the names we never find. Here is of the more than 20 confirmed human feet recovered since 2007, a substantial fraction have. The exact count is a moving figure. Sources tally the total at 20, 21, 22, depending on how borderline cases are counted. And every genetic genealogy identification moves one case from the unidentified column to the identified one. But the pattern is stable even as the numbers shift. Many feet are named, several are not. The unidentified include the shoeless foot from Whidbey Island, the hiking boot foot from Tacoma, the foot from Lake Union in Seattle, the foot from Seattle in 2014, the matched pair from Botanical Beach, the work boot foot from Bellingham, and others. Each of them is a partial human remain that entered the water somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, drifted to a beach, was recovered, was tested, and returned no match to any missing person on file. and unidentified foot is not a solved case it is an unrecovered missing person, most of whose body is still in the sea, whose family may not know they are dead. The scale of that is the part the myth never mentioned. In British Columbia alone, the Coroners Service works with roughly 200 open, unsolved investigations of unidentified human remains. And it holds access to more than 1,300 missing persons investigation files done. Its whole purpose is to try to draw a line between an unidentified remain and the name on the missing list. The feet are a small, visible, unusually well-preserved sample of a much larger, mostly invisible population. The people who go into the water off a bridge, off a boat, off a bicycle into a river at midnight and are never recovered whole, never matched, never named. A foot in a running shoe is morbidly one of the few kinds of human remains the sea reliably returns intact enough to test. The clearest illustration of all of it is the most recent identification. Come back to that. Washington foot from unidentified 2008. In August of 2008, a beachgoer on the Strait of Juan de Fuca, west of Port Angeles, near the international boundary, found a seaweed-covered shoe with a mostly skeletonized foot inside. The Clallam County Sheriff's Office investigated it, ran DNA against the databases of the day, and found no match. The remains sat in an evidence facility for the next 15 years. In 2023, the office partnered with Authoron, Forensic Genetic Genealogy Laboratory in Texas. A public crowdfunding campaign raised roughly $7,500 to pay for the work. In early 2025, Authoron built a genetic profile from the foot and walked it through cousin matching to a relative. Working with the mission detachment of the Mounties and the British Columbia Coroners Service, they confirmed the identity. Jeff Serta, 17 years old. No. He had left his home in Mission, British Columbia, on his bicycle at around midnight on the 29th of April 2007 and had never come home. He had disappeared 4 months before the first foot was ever found on Jedediah Island. His family issued a short statement. Their beloved son Jeff, identified at last through DNA. They believed he had passed away on or shortly after the night he disappeared, and then they were thankful, at last, to have closure. Investigators on both sides of the border found no indication of any crime. Jeff Sertel's case is the whole phenomenon in one file. A young person goes into the water, a foot comes ashore, the databases return nothing, the foot waits 17 years. And a technology that did not exist. Coda, the mystery was never defeated. Once the ankle mechanics and the shoe buoyancy and the basin currents and the empty bone surfaces are understood, and once the province's own coroners have ruled out foul case by case, there is nothing left of the horror film story. What remains is quieter and harder to close. More than 20 feet came ashore, some are named now. A woman who died from a bridge in 2004, a fisherman missing since 1987, a boy who rode into the night in 2007. And some of the feet are not named, behind each unnamed. For this a person the water has partly returned and entirely failed to identify. And behind that person is the far larger number. The water has not returned at all. The feet are a keyhole. Through them you can see in unusually concrete form the gap that runs under every coastal missing persons system. The distance between the people who are missing and the remains that could name them. A distance that DNA is now slowly closing, one crowdfunded case at a time, decades after the fact. The mystery was never who was cutting off feet, because no one was. The mystery is how many people go into the water and are never brought back to their names. And if you are standing near that water tonight, carrying something too heavy to carry alone, there is a number. In the United States, 988. In Canada, Talk Suicide Canada, someone will answer at any hour. The feet floating in their running shoes onto gray Pacific Northwest beaches are simply the part of that mystery, the sea. For its own different reasons happen to make this channel is called the Quiet Hill Dots. We come back to the things people fear and the quieter truths underneath them. Subscribe and the next one will find you. Until then, keep them in mind. More than 20 feet, no crime, and all the names the water is still holding and has not yet given back.